there's a few different routes that things have come to us. And in some cases, we have things that a local authority builds for their own use, and then either alone or with help will figure out a way to make it more generic so that other local authorities can use it. And then I will help make that happen and make sure as many different people as possible can get the benefit of it. The best approach we've had to doing a bigger piece of work from the very start was the chat tool that was developed with a bit of core funding for some core data resource, which put in place a developer to do some work, and then lots of input from other local authorities. And when we built the demand modeling tool last year, needing to do it quickly and needing to make sure it was as useful as possible to as many local authorities as possible, especially those who didn't necessarily have a big analytics team or a lot of experience in modeling or forecasting, then we worked with social finance as that core development resource for project management, technical development, general expertise in all things. And the way we worked with that core resource and then the local authority kind of network and community around it really I think was a massive success story in terms of getting the project to work quickly. So the focus of this session is about how that worked, and with a view to it being, this is something that we can do over and over again potentially. And this model doesn't just have to be for one tool. It can be something that we can do as a community and kind of make that distinction between, well, you don't have to be a user of the software who just buys what's on the shelf. By working in this way, then we can design together and develop together, but still make sure that there's that thing in the middle that keeps it all spinning. So if you can skip me forward one slide, Sarah, thank you. It's always a bit awkward doing a presentation when one person's driving and the other person's talking, but it's much easier than sharing the controls between three people. So the demand modeling tool came out of Kent County Council in its first iteration. They were using it locally, developing it locally to try and answer that question that pretty much everyone was trying to answer. What's going to happen to our social care services if the calls we're not currently getting from schools about social care concerns all arrive in a rush once the schools return, or all arrive in September after the summer holidays, or what have you? And there were 15 kind of major players in this project, so it's a real collaborative effort. Some of those names are up on the screen there. And the output was a tool which was built in Excel, explicitly on purpose in Excel so that any local authority can download it and use it, much to the chagrin of some of the technical developers involved who wanted to use some other technologies. Built in Excel so anyone can use it, built by a dedicated technical resource, and using the Annex A data set, which every local authority has to produce anyway in anticipation of an Ofsted inspection. So those Annex A child level lists we took as our core data set and said, if we can't do it with those lists, then we're not going to do it because we can't put more burden on local authorities at this time. We need to give them something they can just use. And so from that, you put your list in and you would get something like what you see on the screen there, which says, if you can see those little lines, basically in the dark blue line that goes up to about September 20, these are your actual weekly referral figures that are coming in your front door. And the orange line, I think, says, this is what your trend would have looked like if we mapped your trend to continue without lockdown having happened. So you can see there's a dip there during the lockdown period at the very beginning of that chart. And the blue line says, given that didn't happen, and we got the dark blue line, then if we anticipate some of that demand's going to come back, then you're going to see some of that peaking above the normal expected trend at particular periods. And there's quite a lot more complexity to this model. It takes into account things like the normal seasonality of social care work. In a lot of councils, there's always a peak in November. So it looks at your historical data and says, well, what does the normal monthly trend look like anyway? Let's map that as the trend, and then let's see how that was affected by lockdown and seeks to predict the future. That's what the tool does. I'm going to hand over to Chris now to talk a bit more about some of that. Hopefully I've not stolen some of his thunder there by talking too much. And and how we approach that problem and how we try to solve it.
That's great. Thank you, Alistair. And yeah, I think Alistair has given a really good overview of the tool itself. And I think it's a really exciting tool. It was built for this very specific purpose of modeling COVID demand. We didn't necessarily expect that it would be repurposed to be used so soon, but here we are. And I think there's a lot of exciting stuff in the future for the development of the tool itself as well. But I think for this presentation, what we were quite keen to highlight beyond the features of the tool itself is actually how having that wider data to insight community involved throughout the process actually enabled us to really build a tool that was valuable for a large range of local authorities, and actually it assisted in almost every step of the development process. So I think, as Alistair has flagged, at the start of lockdown, children's services saw a drop in demand, and generally there was uncertainty about what this would mean in the longer term. And through conversations with the Data to Insights network, it was very clear that this was a common concern. But most local authorities were very busy responding to the crisis, and very few of them were actually able to spare time to be doing the kind of complex data work that's required to build some sort of model for forecasting demand. Despite there not being many local authorities with the capacity to be doing this type of work, there were some out there. So Kent being the perfect example, and through that Data to Insight network, we were able to very quickly identify the local authorities who had been able to start addressing this problem. Kent, who had this particularly promising model, were very generous and very willing for us to then share that more broadly. And I think this is, again, where the value of having that network came to the fore, because once that Kent model was posted to the Data to Insight Knowledge Hub, we were able to very quickly see that it was getting lots of downloads, and also start to get feedback on what people would want to see changed. So we went from, here's an emerging need, here is some initial work that has been done around that need, to having a very clear, validated demand for a tool that, as well as a list of potential features that we would add to that tool to make it really useful and really usable for a wide range of different local authorities. At that point, we went to MHLG and were able to secure funding, and we could then bring in a dedicated team that was focused around the development of that tool. And I think in this development phase, that's where, again, this Data to Insight network really came through, and the benefits were really clear. So you can see on this slide here that we had a range of different levels of collaboration with different local authorities throughout the Data to Insight network. So immediately we had a core group, which was Data to Insight and ourselves, who were doing the prioritization of features on a daily basis, very much working on the day-to-day work involved in developing the tool. Then we had a wider feedback circle of local authorities who were very engaged. We could send them a new tool or a new added feature to the tool, and they would very quickly get back to us with any bugs that they found, any thoughts that they had about what was working and what wasn't. And being able to quickly get that feedback from people who were very familiar with the tool was extremely useful in allowing us to move quickly and develop new features that we knew worked. But then there's always a risk with that kind of development, that you build a tool that people are very, very familiar with, and you think that it works brilliantly, and then suddenly you send it out into the world, and what made a whole lot of sense to people who'd seen the tool every day suddenly doesn't land very well to people who have to pick it up with totally fresh eyes. And I think here, again, having that Data to Insight network became particularly valuable, because we had a whole number of different local authorities who we could reach out to and share the tool with them to get fresh eyes, get that fresh perspective and feedback on the tool from someone who hadn't been engaged in the development process. And we could do that multiple times throughout. And that was really important, and it led to some key pivots. So Some examples were, by the time we'd gotten towards the end of the development phase, people were much more concerned in the longer term effect of COVID. So we moved away from referral modeling to more of a focus on caseloads and child protection plans and looked after children. And also it meant that we focused on modeling a second lockdown, which was particularly useful for people when they were thinking about the tier system and when that came into play. So those were the benefits of having that network in the first two phases or the first bits of the project. But once we actually had something, again, that's where I think the real power of the network comes to the fore in actually scaling that tool. And so I will hand to Sarah now, who I think will talk about how we scaled this tool and got it out to as many people as possible.
Thank you, Chris. So I guess social finance has been has done tools like these before. I think one of the challenges around building tools like this is that they often benefit only the ones who are directly involved. And I think the really interesting piece about this project, because we benefit from the Data to Insights network and MSCLGs, we were able to actually share the tool with the 152 local authorities. And we know that these resulted in approximately, I think, I'm not sure if the number is up to date, but 60 downloads of the tool. And now, because there is the infrastructure in place, it can be maintained by Data to Insights going forward. So actually, before I'll hand over to Alistair to just summarize a couple of next steps of the project, I'll just talk you to what we think were the key, just to summarize the key three success factors of the project. I think this won't be new. I think Alistair and Chris have described a lot of these. So I think in the first place, the team that we had. So I think we had a dedicated team. So ourselves from social finance, we had Alistair, and we had also the analysts from the different local authorities. And I think this was a really flexible team with a combination of different skills, from the very specific Excel modeling skills to the knowledge about the children's services in specific and the data we were using. Also the user research skills to be able to test the product and iterate quite quickly. And also the stakeholder engagement in general that we had to do with lots of these different local authorities. So I think the team here was quite an important factor. I think then the funding was also quite critical, as Alistair said. This obviously started with the model that Kent built, but I think actually having that funding to secure a team that was kind of full-time devoted to developing this tool was quite important in a moment where everyone was in kind of a crisis and focus on other issues. So I think that really helped, gave us the ability to develop resources to kind of build on the tool that Ken has built and developed further. And then I guess, well, the last one and potentially one of the most important is obviously the network. And because we could have the funding and the team and develop the tool, but it would never have the scale that this, and we would never have the impact that I think we're having with the tool if we couldn't engage the community of users. So I think both MSCLG and Data to Insight have provided here a significant role in terms of the access to these analysts in the local authorities. So I think we don't have a slide, but I'm just going to hand over to Alistair. I think we have a couple of minutes to talk about next steps.
Yeah, so I think one of the really interesting things about this project as it progressed, and I joined the team after it had started, but one of the really interesting things about it as it progressed was the way the enthusiasm from the funders which was the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government, MHCLG, it was split between the ability of us to build this tool and to answer this question, solve this gap in the market for local authorities on the one hand, but on the other hand, just the ability to do this thing in the way we were doing it, and to leverage a community of local authorities who kind of already exist and are already excited about working together and doing things as they are in Data to Insight, primarily around the chat and the benchmarking tool, all the other tools that we support as well, that have come out of local authorities to be shared. And that doesn't often exist. There's a lot of different areas of local government where that network doesn't exist, and you wouldn't be able to leverage that benefit in the way that we have. I think because that does exist, then really I think we need to take that as far as we can go with it and really get as much value as we can. And it's really exciting to me that we were able to get kind of 2 or 3 local authorities just engaged in this on a kind of every couple of days. They would chip in some more feedback on this tool and make sure that it was on the right track. But then also every couple of days we'd be able to get in touch with another local authority and say, hey, can you spend half an hour with us? And people would give us the time because they believed in the product and they know the stuff that comes out of Data to Insight is useful to them historically. And that's a really great advertisement for pursuing the same kind of approach in future with things that we're doing, and to say to people like central government organisations, potential funders, local authority partners, whoever, for the little bit of money that you put into this or the little bit of time that you put into it, a lot more people are going to match that and beyond in some cases. And we've had the same thing with other kind of smaller scale tools where someone in Wandsworth has built something for their own use and shared it with a colleague in Brighton who has then said, well, because you've done all that work, I've now got the time to make it so that any local authority could use it. And then just 2 authorities together can make that happen. It's that little bit of impetus to get started, and that knowledge that there's somewhere exists in the centre to make it happen, and that network to share it, really gives us a great potential to go where local authorities want to go, and quite quickly. And so as a new problem emerges, we can say, all right, that's a problem, can we fix it? And kind of jump to it, really. At this project, we kind of identified the issue, and then within 2 months, people were writing code, and the project was up and running. And by the end of kind of August, September rather, the tool was there and it was available for people to use and start modeling with. Just a quick note on next steps before we finish, because I realised we're out of time. You may have noticed that we are once again in a national lockdown in England. And I said this in my previous session, the only exciting thing about this for me is that it means we're now in a situation which is analogous to the situation we were in when we were building this tool. And when we were building it, we didn't know what was going to happen. We had to make a lot of guesses. That's not the case this time. We kind of know what kind of thing happened last time we were in a lockdown in social care. And we can say, well, let's look at that data and let's use that to inform the model. So the next stage of this really is for me to get to work engaging local authorities in helping me figure out what's important about the historical data and how do we feed that into a model so that this tool can carry on being useful. And then my longer term vision is that we are not locked in our houses forever, and we can start to mainstream this tool in a kind of an abnormal situations modeler, so to speak. And you can pick any period in your history and say, this was a weird period when something happened. Look at that data, and I think we're going to be in a similar period in the future. Tell me what that would do to my current data. So that's the kind of route we're looking at. If you would like to be involved in the future and you're not already, then I think you probably have my contact details. But if not, post a question up and I will certainly get in touch with you.